Hello, I'm Ken Kinsley, and this is Finding the Words, the only podcast devoted to text based art and artists. In times like these, it can be a little difficult for anyone paying attention who also has a conscience to keep from getting into a rut of doom scrolling and maybe throwing things at your TV. And if you're anything like me, trying to continue a creative pursuit like art or making a podcast about art can feel more than a little superfluous. But there are more than a few artists out there whose work can cut through all the noise on your Instagram feed, straddling that line between art and current events and helping to put all the insanity and inhumanity, especially of the Trump variety, into perspective. Chief amongst these artists is Jesse Duquette, with his no holds barred pen and color pencil drawings, full of fearless satire and gallows humor. His particular brand of political cartooning, and we get into how he feels about political cartoons, is such a threat to the powers that be, and we get into how big of a threat he thinks that he is, that Meta has routinely shadow banned him for years and even eliminated all of his accounts on their platforms, cutting him off from his 200,000 plus followers back in October. His new account is back up to over 75,000. It grew since our interview, and he's showing no signs of slowing down or backing off. Here's my chat with Jesse Duquette. So, Jesse, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Happy to be here.
You did have the Daily Dawn, which you started way back in the first Trump presidency. You do one or two drawings a day on top of a day job. How much time do each drawings usually take from idea to finished product?
Well, it depends. Sometimes, oftentimes, the idea comes pretty quickly and clearly.
Mm-hmm.
And in those instances, it'll be maybe a half hour.
Wow.
Other times where I'm just kind of figuring it out, it can take like an hour and a half.
Mm-hmm.
Or well, I mean, there's some drawings that are maybe a bit more detailed or involved, and
Mm-hmm.
it'll take a little bit longer. Usually, it's less the drawing and more trying to figure out the right approach to whatever it is I'm trying to draw. But I would say that's kind of the range, and a half hour or 20 something minutes to like close to 2 hours, depending on the drawing itself.
Mm-hmm. So you have a lot of text in the artwork,
Mhm.
or along with the artwork, and they seem like they'd be kind of inseparable. Does one happen first sometimes, or
Sometimes. Well, yeah. I mean, I would say again, similar to the last question, where it really depends
sure?
on the drawing. Sometimes it'll be the text will come first. I will say I probably have a lot more fun with the text than I do with the drawing. That to me, that's more.
Hmm.
I enjoy that more, like coming up with whatever text. To me, they are definitely intertwined. It's just
Mhm.
tends to be the kind of art that I enjoy tends to have a combination. Um, so yeah, for me, it's they're sort of intertwined and kind of inseparable. And definitely, yeah, the text is always the thing that I have like the most fun with or I enjoy the
Hmm.
most.
And like I said, this started back in 2017 after the first Trump press conference on day one of in 2017, when I think you've said that was the Sean Spicer lie about crowd sizes, and it was
Mm-hmm.
just so, as you've said, it was just so casual and obvious that it was a lie. And what was it about that spurred you into action? Was it just the casualness?
Yeah, in that particular example, I was visiting my parents while my wife and mother were at the Women's March in DC,
Hmm.
and so my father, my son, and I were just kind of hanging out at my parents' house, and that came on the TV, and um, I had by and large gotten off of social media for the most part following that election, just because it was just everything was it was
Hmm.
depressing and weak. when that press conference came on, it was kind of as something as simple as it being such a weirdly casual lie. That's kind of the thing that struck me about it, where you were anticipating what it was going to be like, and you imagined all the worst case scenarios and possibilities, and then here was essentially day one, and they open up their administration with just something that was so silly, which obviously now 8
Oh God,
years and
yeah.
change later becomes, oh, that's just emblematic. That's sort of that's the deal. But that's really what it was. It was just so, it was so,
It was like the warning shot across the bow almost, like, "Here's
yeah,
what we're gonna do."
pretty much.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you've put out some Instagram posts recently with some, non-Trump comics from the before times. I think you've called them palate
Oh,
cleansers, basically. Obviously, clearly a longing for a not so distant past.
yeah.
Do you ever have time to draw anything that's not like political or Trump related? Or I mean, it's not
Not
always
really.
Trump, but yeah, I was gonna say with
Not really. I mean,
yeah.
especially because this has become, I mean, it's not the same exact thing as what the Daily Dawn was, where I really was
Hmm.
trying to adhere to this documentarian approach of whatever happens that day. To be honest,
Hmm.
that I wouldn't be able to do it now. It's so much more, it would be so much more difficult to try to actually genuinely document everything, since it, there's so much.
Yeah.
It would be impossible. It would be impossible to do it. So I still, however, I'm trying to document, I guess, the what I can, and so it really doesn't leave a lot of room for much else. But also, to be honest, um, sadly, I'm not also, I guess, incentivized, or not incentivized, but they're inspired, I guess, to do much else right now.
Oh
It's
yeah.
hard to get the mental bandwidth and to allow a lot else in when you're kind of living in
Hmm.
that world. It's hard to break out of it a little bit.
Understand that completely. Yeah, I mean, when I contacted you to do this, I was saying, I hadn't done an interview for a while. I had one set up, but I hadn't had anything else because it just seemed like, what am I doing? Like, there's so much other stuff going on. So when I thought, well, this is what I need to this marries those two things together.
Mm.
Plus, the nice part about it is you have a really great sense of humor with we can laugh into the darkness a little bit, and you have a undeniably yet appropriately dark sense of humor about, like, there's one where there's a younger guy sitting next to this hospital bed, and the guy in the hospital bed is hooked up to wires and everything. He says, come on, dad, don't think of it as losing your health care, think of it as gaining tax breaks for billionaires. I mean,
Mm.
that's dark. Where did you develop your sense of, like, gallows humor?
I think it was being exposed to different things at a pretty young age. It made
Hmm.
me my sense of humor precocious, I guess, very quickly. So, my dad had a lot of, like, Zap comics, a lot of R. Crumb,
Mm.
that kind. So there was a lot of heavy metal magazine. So
Oh yeah.
I was exposed to a lot of, for lack of a better description, adult,
Hmm.
or adult oriented,
Yeah.
art, first, and the things that I started to get interested in on my own early on also had some of those sensibilities. So, like, Bloom County,
Mm.
things like that, that were, you know a little bit more, had more broad appeal than, say, like R. Crumb, but were definitely, equipped with a bit of a darker tone to them, a little bit of sarcasm to it.
Mhm.
It's just the thing that I've always found to be the most, I guess, interesting. It's the thing that strikes a whatever chord or nerve in me.
Mhm.
I think I think it's really important. I'm a big proponent in, when you're dealing or commenting on people like this, not just movements certainly too, but people, like the kind of people I tend to draw about. To me, at the end of the day, what they really are, the motivating principle underneath all of these people is profound insecurity. So I'm all about exploiting that as much as possible, and trying to make them see how deep down, how terrible they really are. So, and a lot of times that'll come with ridicule and satire and humor, and that's, to me, that's where it all kind of stems from. Drawing,
Mhm.
you can do that with drawing a little bit, but this is again where the text to me is way more interesting. I'm not a I'm not a fan of political cartooning.
Mhm.
But I can get behind like political satire and writing in that way, and I
Mhm.
think that's
Mhm.
probably where that kind of those things marry a little bit.
And I've heard you say that basically Trump murdered satire. What was the time of
Well,
death?
I mean,
What was what was the time of death on that? I mean, how
oh God,
what was the
I mean,
moment that it was like, well, we've crossed a line here and
I don't know that I could actually think back to the moment when it happened. I mean, the thing about him is he's always had this strange, for like the sort of like breathtaking ego
Mhm.
and sort of lack of self-awareness. He also has had this like part of him, this sort of, not self-deprecation, but it does get there a little bit. But he's got this weird sense of humor where the self-awareness comes when he's trying to be funny, and you can tell he's doing things that are tongue-in-cheek and to sort of like, provoke a response. But at the
Mhm.
same time, it is like, it is a little bit of murdering satire. Like, so for example, a long time ago during the first administration, there was one, he still had a Twitter account. First time, he had tweeted out a photograph of his head superimposed on Sylvester Stallone's body as Rocky. Just like, which would in any other sort of iteration be like someone would make that as a joke, like, oh, this is what how this guy sees himself, and it's like, no, he really does, and he will show you that he does. So it's these all these things that he does where he's saying the things or sharing these things outright that people would maybe create to make fun and point, like hyperbolically. I think that's the thing.
Mhm.
He's it's I think it's satire. He's murdered for sure, but also hyperbole. Like he just
Yeah.
he'll go farther in sort of his own self description than anyone could possibly put the words in his mouth to do. So it is hard to, or it makes it a little harder to approach satire in the same way with
Mhm.
people like this, because they're almost like they're in on the joke in a way.
And it's so rife for going far with it. I mean, they're really calling for it. Do you ever get an idea and start drawing something and think, I can't do that. This is a step too far. I can't draw that because you've got one where it's a takeoff on the Last Supper, and you've got
Mhm.
Trump and Musk and JD Vance and the whole crew around the table, and the Statue of Liberty. They're feasting on the corpse of the Statue of Liberty, and it's bloody, and like you said, you would never. You said you weren't a fan of political cartoons. That would never fly in a newspaper.
Mhm.
So, is there something that you're like, well, I can do this on Instagram or wherever, but is there a line that you're like, I can't go
No, I don't think so. I think that's the problem with political cartooning. I mean,
Yeah.
that to me, that's why I don't like. I think to me it's toothless. It's got whatever function, I guess. So, like, it's got
Hmm.
a moment of levity in your newspaper, but and that's fine. There's a time and a place for that. I think that this is not the time or place for that kind of. It's just
Yeah.
it's unnecessary. To me, it's like it has the material heft and impact of a glass of room temperature milk. To me, it doesn't do anything. It's not, there, and I get why they're playing. It's a certain set of rules you're playing with when you're in that context. If you're in a newspaper, there's things there's editors, there's ad revenue, there's all sorts of things that
Hmm.
people have to be cognizant of, and that I get it. But that's expressly why it does absolutely nothing for me.
Yeah.
And so, for example, like that Last Supper drawing, which to me is like very, very tame, but
Oh,
yeah, I could see that. Well, I mean, because it's just symbolism, right? And
right.
um, you know, I,
For mass media, it'd be way too much, but for
I
just
suppose so. I
normal
suppose
art,
so.
yeah.
but I can't think of anything that would be going too far. Like the
Hmm.
one rule, I guess, that I had for myself during the Daily Dawn, but it wasn't even anything that even came up as something to be worried about. It was just for myself. Was I wasn't going to poke any fun at Barron because he was
Hmm.
literally a minor at the
Sure,
time.
sure.
I don't care about that anymore. But I also there's like way more important people to
Oh
target.
yeah,
Like I don't
yeah.
really care about that guy. But other than that, no, I don't. I think I'm a believer that everything is fair game. And
Hmm.
however, not period, right? Like there's a right and a wrong way to go about everything. Um, so I think that's one of the I would say truisms of the human experience. Everything should be open to, at a minimum, just satire, which is
Hmm.
not a malicious thing. Satire is just satire.
Sure.
Um, but yeah,
Yeah, and some people would say that your satire is a bit malicious. I'm noticing I'm thinking that the right wing trolling must be
yeah.
fairly intense. I
Oh
know
yeah.
you have a pull quote on your website from a a non fan, let's put it that way, who says, "When the next civil war hits, you get the rope first." I thought that
Yeah.
was pretty ballsy to put that on your website. That hey,
Yeah.
look what people are saying about this.
Well,
Um,
I'm trying to be honest.
sure, sure.
It's not for everybody. And yeah, you're right. My satire, I think is I have almost expressly malicious intent for the people that I'm targeting,
I can
because that
appreciate that.
is what they deserve, I guess. So yeah, for sure. I definitely, for me, satire almost always is weaponized.
Mhm,
Um, but yeah, that kind of commentary. I put it in there because I thought it was funny.
mhm.
But also I am aware that it's not for everybody. It's not the Big Bang Theory. It's not
Yeah,
Mumford and Sons. It's not Family Circus. It's so that's fine.
mhm.
So there's going to be critical feedback. you know, Hopefully not all of it is
Yeah,
laden with death
they're not
threats.
exactly texting you to say, "Oh, we have a few notes." So,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
This is not sobering criticism. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. How much more, I mean, besides obviously that guy, how much more is there where that came from, and are you ever concerned about it?
No, not really. I mean, there's a decently steady stream of people who do that, but that's also very much the hallmark of the internet. Where it's really given
Sure.
people a lot of
Mhm,
courage.
mm.
um,
It's kinda
so
like it's like the old, George Carlin bit about the amount of an asshole somebody is directly proportional to how close they are to you.
yeah, 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 yeah,
If they're
right.
standing right next to you, it's like, "This guy's an asshole." If
Yeah,
they're
yeah,
online, "That guy," so, yeah.
yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Mm,
So I mean, there's a I guess a fairly steady stream of that stuff, but I've never been there's been threats and things that have happened, but they've always
mhm,
been pretty generic, and nothing that's ever given me too much. I mean, there are people who've said, I know where you live, but then I'll do my own little research and be like, you definitely don't. And, like I live 20 minutes from you. It's like, you live in Virginia. Like you
yeah,
definitely, so there's just a lot of that posturing, not to sound naive. I know that
mhm,
there's crazy people out there for sure. And we keep seeing that happen more and more, but, um, I'm also not going to, overblow where I think, I
mhm.
stand in that realm.
Do you have any, like, conservative family or friends or anybody who like, the com for whom the comics are a point of contention? Is it ever, like,
I've
a
had
issue at Thanksgiving or,
thankfully for the most part, my family is on the
Mhm,
spectrum. They range from either liberal to progressive. So, I
mm,
don't. There are family members for sure who are proud, and to this day proud Trump voters and supporters. They're not family that I see often.
mhm,
So it's not really something that comes up. And I've had friends who were, I wouldn't say, say Trump voters, but um, definitely took exception to how hard I would go at Trump and MAGA in general, and I think so. There definitely was some fracturing. I think with some friendships there, people who didn't appreciate that I was taking them to
Mm.
task as hard as I was. Um,
Could you make his
but
hands a little bigger, please?
yeah,
Please
well,
lay off
that's
the
funny.
orange on the face. Could you? Come on,
Yeah,
Jesse. That's
that is
mean.
funny that you say that, because one of the first criticisms I got was from someone who was actually like who's following the account, the Daily Dawn account, and they messaged me to say how upset they were with me for drawing his hands small, because there were people out there with small hands, and it was very inconsiderate and offensive for me not to take that community, which I did not know that was a community, but a community that not wasn't taking that community's affliction or whatever as seriously as I should. So I've gotten the feedback about the tiny hands for sure.
From conservatives?
No, this was like I mean, I don't know how they would identify, but they were
Yeah.
at least, a liberal, Democrat for sure.
Hmm. And I saw that you this was funny. You teamed up to do the illustrations for something called Congress Sutra.
Oh yeah.
How did that come about, and can you explain for people what that is? You do a better
Yeah,
job
that
than I would.
was that was funny. I was on a plane. I don't remember where I was going, but I was on a plane, and this person just messaged me out of the blue over Instagram, saying
Sounds
that they
familiar.
they worked for a yeah, they worked for a
These people.
an advertising company out in LA, and they had this idea, and these a group of people that work for this ad agency, and they were kind of going and doing their own thing, and they had this idea. They had the whole thing fleshed out, like they had all this stuff figured out, and they asked me if I'd be interested in partnering with them on this. And um, when when they began to send me their ideas, and the premise basically was, and this was all the summer leading up to the election, the 2024, the last elections.
Mhm. Yeah.
It was all about reproductive rights, and it basically was
Mm.
saying, how we're basically, trying to legislate reproductive rights into oblivion. And so this was basically the Kama Sutra as if it was written by our arch conservative Congress, ergo Congress Sutra. So, and I get requests to collaborate on things, and I'm usually pretty lukewarm on it, because I have difficulty. I have difficulty collaborating. I'm
Mm.
not. It's hard for me to um, work on something with someone else. Like, I like to have the idea, see it through fruition, and get it done. It's just something I don't have a lot of experience with. However, when they sent me their ideas, like, this is the different, it was all based around positions. It's like the Kama Sutra,
Sure, sure.
and they were so adult. It was very cutthroat. It was very, no holds barred, not pulling any punches. Um, I loved it. I loved the tone of it so much that I was so happy. I was also happy that I didn't have to like do any mental lifting, because
Yeah, that
they did it all. Like, I just
all
said,
the ideas came to you. You just drew the pictures for it.
that's
Yeah,
it. I didn't have to do there was some creativity in depicting the things they were describing, but like
sure.
the hard work was really done. So of course that made it really easy for me to work with them. But mostly just the tone of it. What I immediately was captured by was that these people, it was well, not all, it was mostly women. I mean, they were coming from this place of, there was real skin in the game. This was yeah, we're doing this under the auspices of again, satire and comedy, but this
Mhm.
is really serious stuff. So the material warrants being taken seriously, having a serious heft to it. And so I really appreciated that they were approaching it from this standpoint of like, you know, really, really dark comedy and viciously going at these people.
Mhm. R
And
really r
it was easy decision to do it, and it was a lot of work. I mean, I don't remember how many drawings. It was like 30 something drawings
Mhm.
in like in a week. I think I had to do them.
Oh,
It was a
wow.
really fast turnaround, so that was a challenge. But I was excited to be a part of it. I mean, all the proceeds went towards campaigns defending reproductive rights, so you know
Mhm.
it was definitely all, you know, for a truly great cause. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. That was a lot of fun to work on that.
Yeah, they reamed them literally and figuratively, so,
Yeah,
um,
right.
and speaking of reaming, you have the distinction of being the most shadow banned account on Instagram of all time.
Self-nominated.
So okay, okay. Well, yeah,
I mean, it's not, you know, it's
who's
not
gonna who's
quantifiable.
gonna yeah, okay. I like just I can edit that out. Um, for those of us who have not been on the receiving end of a shadow ban and might not quite get what exactly happens when that's going on,
So it's very interesting. It's an interesting question because no one can give you the exact answer. But basically, what shadow banning is,
because it's shadowy.
um, it's
I
yeah,
mean,
it's the tactic through which social media, specifically Meta, and even probably most specifically, really Instagram,
yeah.
where they moderate and restrain an account, and then that can manifest itself in a number of ways. And it's tough because again, it's not the most straightforward things. Occasionally, what happens is a post or an account will get reported,
Mhm,
um, and you know, if it gets reported, occasionally that post will get removed.
mhm.
And then if that post gets removed, occasionally what will happen is you'll get notified. Sometimes I don't know. Sometimes
Right.
they take a post down and I'm not made aware. Um, but what they'll do with posts they take down, and when they do that, they'll restrict the account in some way. And again, sometimes they tell you, they'll say you can't do this for 30 days or you can no longer do that. So that's more of like the sort of a official shadow banning, where it's
Mhm,
really just account restriction they put in place. With the sort of unofficial shadow banning takes place, that's a lot more insidious and a lot more commonplace. Is without you knowing it, they'll restrict an account's reach. They'll make you invisible to anyone who doesn't follow you.
mhm,
They'll put your account. It won't allow your account to be seen in like explore feeds. They'll really completely basically turn off the reach for your account. So essentially it's banning your account, but in the shadows, because it's
mhm,
all very, um, under the surface of how they're doing it. And so over the years, I found different ways you can kind of tell. And if you go and either you or someone you go to try to search your account, your handle, and if it doesn't show up, that's a good indication you've been shadow banned.
mhm,
And so my account has been shadow banned to varying degrees, almost in perpetuity. And
mhm,
again, sometimes it's a little, and then sometimes it's a lot, but it's very weird. There are people who see every one of my posts,
mhm. Hmm,
and they don't ever miss them. And then there's other people who are following as well, and then I'll vanish from their feed entirely. They can't find me for like 10 months.
mhm,
So it's not all or one. It's not shut up to everybody, although that has happened. But primarily, it's this really odd, piecemeal kind of count restriction, which is really just sort of a muzzling of content they don't appreciate or like.
mhm.
And I would say about all this, like, it's a private company, so they can do what they want. They've got their
Sure,
community
sure.
guidelines, and that's completely fine. My issue isn't even so much with the shadow banning. Again, like it's its own company; they can do what they want. That's all fine. And certainly, one of the deals you broker when you're on a social media site is
Mhm,
there are terms. You're operating in this environment. You're going to take the good with the stuff that's not so good along with it. You don't have to like it. You can certainly find ways to try to petition to change those things.
Sure.
But my main problem with it is it's not applied democratically at all. It is very obviously a tool, shadow banning, that is weaponized against a particular side of the political spectrum, like 100%. I'm not someone who ever makes a habit of reporting things. I just don't. I'm not like scrolling enough to like come across content that I have a problem with.
You're too busy
Um,
drawing.
yeah, but as a test to sort of like kind of figure this stuff out, like I began reporting, different accounts or posts that were, um, where there's no gray area. Like there was, for example, there was this one account where it was this, someone who was very obviously like just a neo-Nazi. They were, I forget, their bio had something that sort of, alluded to it, not very secretively. But anyways, one of their 3 posts they had on their feed was just a swastika. That's all it was. Like, no,
Subtle.
I don't even think there was a caption. Yeah, very subtle. I don't even think that there was a caption. It was just a swastika. So to me, that was the lowest of low hanging fruit. This is very easy since I do know that one of the things, or I can't say I know, I don't work for Instagram, but one of the things I believe is the case is part of their AI, when they're, they'll scan different things, they'll scan for certain things they find to be offensive, one of which is the symbol of the swastika. So to me, this was like oh, well, obviously this will come down. I reported it and they didn't take it down. I got the message saying we've reviewed it and it doesn't go against our community guidelines. That's the most sort of like obvious example, but it happens. Never once has anything I've reported. And again, I'm not reporting accounts that I don't like or something that's like a pro Trump. I don't, whatever. Like that's
right.
Yeah, fine. But stuff where it's like an obvious offense to their community guidelines. There was one where someone had like an effigy of Bernie Sanders and a noose hanging outside of a window, like stuff where it's, and this is a real person. They're like, so things that would definitely fall under kind of any entity's community guidelines.
Sure.
Never has anything been taken down. But, a lot of different accounts I interact with that are operating on the same side of the political spectrum that I do, almost 100% of them ever experience the same exact thing. Authors, Frederick T. Joseph is an author who's a New York Times bestselling author, and his account's been heavily shadow banned. So people do all sorts of crazy tactics, like he'll start his posts with a picture of Taylor Swift or like a golden retriever, and lo and behold, it gets way more interaction and attention or whatever than other posts will, just simply by subverting it that way. It's very silly.
I've seen a lot of people like cooking, like it's a cooking video, but while they're cooking, they're talking about politics, and then that they don't get. How many times do you think you've been shadow banned? Is there any way of knowing, or?
Well, no, because it's like it's hard to tell when it begins and ends.
Sure.
Because it's not all or nothing. It's very much a range, and how profoundly it's applied or broadly. So it's hard to say. I mean, I think almost without exception, the account's been at some degree of being shadow banned. I think there's been a couple of times where it's relented and not been so bad, but starting, I think, sometime in 2019 is when it first started happening, from my recollection. I think that's when it was. But yeah, I mean, it's been fairly constant. I mean, when my account got taken down and deleted altogether and I had to start from scratch, I started the account that I have now, and it got shadow banned within the first month. So it's been a pretty constant regimen, I think.
What's the wimpiest thing they've ever nailed you for? Like, seriously, that got me in trouble, kind of thing.
That's the thing is, that's what it is most of the time. It's something where like I'm so
it's all wimpy.
There was one. I would say my gauge is maybe different from other people, but like the one, where it was, I think it was the drawing I did the day after the election, or it's the drawing I posted the day after the election, and it was the Statue of Liberty with a long red tie around its neck, and it's holding the necktie above its head like a head, like almost like it's a noose, just like
Yeah.
that's holding a necktie. And now when I put up or reposted 3 times, every time it gets taken down.
Mm.
But I would say for the most part, the drawings that, like, I did another one where it was Elon Musk slowly turning into Hitler, and by the end of it, though, he's a swirl of poop with like one of the Führer
The poop
hat on.
emoji. Yeah.
That got taken down. So there was another one that was just text, and I can't remember now. It was something that was like so innocuous though,
Mm.
and it wasn't anything offensive, and it was one I wish I could remember. It was a text having something to do with Biden, and it was absolutely nothing offensive about it. It was a really sort of like middle of the road post. Again, it was just text, and typically those have like some kind of like idea in my head, and I realized, oh, it doesn't need a drawing, just text is fine. And I'll usually like put those out like in the middle of the day if I'm thinking of it. But it was, yeah, whatever it was, I can't think of it now. But the fact it got taken down was mystifying, because it was completely an unoffensive post. It was about as middle of the road as I've ever posted, and that got
Yeah.
taken. But that's the thing. Sometimes they tell you why. Most of the times, I don't
Yeah.
get a answer as to why it's been removed.
And you alluded to it a moment ago, but you just got straight up kicked off of all Meta platforms. Was it back in October last year?
Yeah, it was a month before the election.
Yeah.
And that one was another circumstance where
Shocking timing on that.
Yeah, exactly. And it was the drawing that did it. I had done a drawing of Mike Lindell, the pillow guy, because this was when he was doing a pillow sale, and he was pricing them at $14.88. 14 and 88 being numerically linked to Hitler. It was not a subtle reference at all. So
$14.99, we can let it slide.
Sure.
But come on.
If you use one of the two
Right.
number combinations, like, no problem. But using both, come on. So I did a drawing of him using sort of the My Pillow logo, where it's him in the blue shirt cradling a pillow, and it says My Pillow underneath it. Only this one, he was cradling, instead of a pillow, it was a KKK hood draped over his arm. And instead of his like gigantic mustache, I gave him like the little Hitler mustache. Instead of My Pillow, it said Mine Pillow. And that's all it said. No, nothing. That's it. There was no swastika. That's all it was. And so I posted that, and then I got a notification that it got taken down because they said I was selling drugs, which I couldn't really figure that one out. Like, I mean,
was there a drug reference in the, I remember seeing that one. Was there any other reference to drugs in it, or?
No, I mean, that was it.
No.
He was the KKK hood draped over his arm, Mine Pillow.
That's bizarre.
The Hitler mustache. So they gave me an opportunity to appeal. So of course I did, which was odd because it was sort of self-evident, like, well, there's no drug anything happening in this, so I don't know. I don't know what else. How do you? It should be on them to prove to me where the drugs come into play. I shouldn't have to. Yeah. I shouldn't have to disprove a fantasy. But so I appealed it, and that same day they got back to me saying, "Sorry, you're selling drugs. It's staying down." And then within minutes, I got a notification saying that all my accounts had been permanently deleted, no opportunity to review. It was brutal.
Yeah.
Mostly because my fault. I was using the account as an archive. That's where I was keeping all of my work, digital sort of portfolio. Gone. Yeah. There's so many drawings I don't have any record of anymore, because they had sold or something, and that's where I had documented them, and had some kind of way to keep an image of them, and
You didn't have it
gone.
anywhere on your computer. You didn't have it on a Google Drive or a nothing.
No,
It was
I mean, I
just
have definitely a
Instagram.
lot of stuff I do have, but there's a
Sure.
lot of stuff that's gone.
Oh man.
Um, and the that was the part that really hurt. Having that account build over time. I'd gotten to like make different acquaintances
Hmm.
that through that account, all gone again. And that whole experience of that first account was very surreal. When you go into this, when you're just like drawing in your living room,
Hmm.
and the sort of snowball, people start like, oh, I start paying attention, and next thing I know, that account had 220,000
Oh
followers.
wow.
It was very weird. It was very
Hmm.
truly like a life of its own, and it was a cool thing. It was almost like an out of body experience, like watch it happen.
Yeah.
Um, so definitely not a fun experience having that got taken away, especially because it was over such a um, invented reason.
Hmm.
If it was something that I had done, if I had made a drawing that was like very obviously like, oh, because there are definitely times where I'll make a drawing and I'll sort of know, oh yeah, there's a good chance this one will get taken
Okay.
down. But that one, there's no way I could have
Hmm.
anticipated that.
Yeah, and you've started a new account, obviously, and that one I was just checking right before we started. That one's back up to 73.5 thousand. So it's ticking its way back up into the before numbers. Why
Mhm.
why do you think your art is such a threat to the Zuckerbergs of the world
um,
that they have to get rid of, like, not get, remove you from their platform?
I don't know that it's a threat. I think anything left of hard right is um, an undesirable.
Mhm.
I don't presume to think that my cartoons or any cartoons pose a threat. Um, I just think it's an undesirable opinion. It's an undesirable expression of a version of this country that they're
Mhm.
desperately trying to annihilate. I think that's about as much credence as they give it. I think that's the extent of it. Um, you know, I also think that there's also, I'm sure, on the part of the people, like the Zuckerbergs, the Musks out there, I'm sure there is this concern over the catalyst. What's going to be the thing that's going to
Mm.
cause the levee to break? Because it's not sustainable to have the inequality be so top heavy. And so I think there is perhaps a little bit of the concern, like what's going to be the catalyst? Like anything
Right.
could be the catalyst. And social media certainly allows things to spread that much more effectively. Um, and so, that's part of, I think, where the speech gets silenced. They don't want to leave
Mhm.
they want to remove the oxygen as much as possible from where a spark might catch.
And a lot of attention with your work, justifiably, goes to the meta ban and the shadow banning and the right wing troll backlash. But you also are pretty widely praised. And you also have a pull quote right next to the guy about the Civil War comment there, from Judd Apatow. Apatow, uh, praising you. Have you gotten any positive feedback directly from anyone kind of higher up the political food chain?
I don't
Or
think
negative
so.
feedback from any
Uh,
politicians?
I don't really. No, I mean, there's feedback. No, I've had different politicians like follow
Mhm,
the account. I forget if it's this one, but the last one, like Ro Khanna,
hmm,
different people.
mhm,
I think because of the tone of some of my drawings, I think some politicians are leery of
mhm.
you know connecting too much. I think they could like a post and stuff like that, but just because
Sure.
it's not it's my drawings, the tone of them isn't political lowercase p. It's not as professionally sounding the way maybe they would prefer it to, but no,
Sure.
politics is clear.
Now, a lot of artists would get kind of bent out of shape if they were referred to as a hobbyist, but at least in the beginning, you clearly said, "Hey, look, this is a hobby for me." Like, I am correct about that, right?
Oh
Okay,
yeah,
go ahead.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. I mean,
Do you,
I consider it a hobby. Yeah.
that?
I
Yeah,
also don't have any. The word doesn't have any negative connotation for
okay.
me.
A lot of
I
artists
think
would probably hang up if I mentioned that. They would be like, "Well, it's been nice. I'm out." So
I love a good hobby. I've always had
sure.
a hobby or two. And
And you still see
I
yourself
don't
that
know.
way?
What's that?
You still see yourself that way, or
Yeah.
is it
I don't really
progressed?
know.
Is it progressed somewhere between hobby and job?
It's definitely not a job.
Yeah.
Because I would think for a job, for me, crucially, a job, you would hope anyways you're getting paid. um, so
uh,
so perhaps
you're preaching
it
to the
can.
choir on this one.
So maybe this could segue from a hobby to an unpaid internship. That would be more
Sure, sure.
the palatable mode. But no, I mean it to me it's drawing has always been a hobby. It's always been the thing that I do in my spare time to the exclusion of almost everything else.
Mm.
It's the thing that I enjoy doing the most by a long mile.
Mhm.
So, but again, that is also just me. Like I've never had a weird relationship with the word hobby. Although I completely understand what you're saying. I know there's some
Mhm.
people who would,
Sure.
who view that, view their relationship with their creative output more just differently than
Sure,
I do.
sure.
I guess I'm not very precious about it.
Mhm. And you're kind of a bit of you're kind of a bit of an anomaly. That's a hard one to say.
Oh, yeah.
In terms of my guests, in that you're not really aiming to be part of the exhibiting in galleries kind of art world scene. Although you have had a couple of gallery shows, one group, one solo that I know of. Um,
Mhm.
do you have any inkling to kind of flex your artistic muscles further and do any work that aims either towards galleries or larger works? And I know you work predominantly in colored pencil. Have you thought about, painting on canvas or, anything like that in terms of the art?
Um, painting in terms of the medium, not so much. Like,
Yeah,
painting isn't. I mean, I love
sure.
paintings. It's just not my. It's not
Hmm.
something I've ever spent much time doing. I doing stuff that's larger format. I love all of that. Those ideas. I think. I feel like probably the circumstance under which I would do something like that would be if like I was invited or asked to do some kind of show, and I
Hmm.
in the pursuit of doing the show had to create stuff to go into the show.
Hmm.
I mean, I am a big lover of museums and galleries. I love that experience. At the same time, for the kind of work I do, I find it to be I find them to be fairly sterile, antiseptic environments, and they're
Hmm.
not my favorite environment in which to appreciate or enjoy the kind of work that I do,
Hmm.
which at least right now is 11 by 14 or a little bit smaller sometimes, pen and ink drawing. Like I am very tactile with that. I like turning the page and kind of having
Hmm.
that sort of intimate relationship with it. I'm not opposed to galleries and shows. I just haven't had the opportunity to do them very much.
Hmm.
And again, some of that at least I've been told is a byproduct of the tone in which I operate, which is not for everybody. But no, the shows I've done, which have been a handful of them, I've only been able to go to I think one of them, but they've been from my understanding, well received, and they were, the one I was able to go to was a lot of fun. I got to meet a lot of people, and that whole world, I guess, art world or whatever, it's just never anything that's ever held any interest for me. I don't know.
Sure.
It's not something.
Hmm.
It was never like an endeavor. Even as like a younger person, thinking I want to be an artist someday. Never in
Hmm.
my mind was in that fantasy where like gallery shows. There's nothing that I ever really was never part of that puzzle for me.
Hmm.
Nothing against it. Just I guess I haven't had the opportunity to do it very much.
Hmm.
But I can understand the value for sure, of course.
So with everything in, that you're doing your artwork about, with all of this happening in the world, how bad do you think all of this stuff around the Trump administration will get?
Mm. uh, I don't think it's gonna. I'll say this: I don't see a way in which things reverse course or improve demonstratively
Hmm.
using the same political apparatus as we have before. I think what I've noticed is, from the first time around to this time around, to me, it couldn't be more different.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
I actually recently, and I never do this because I really don't like going back and looking at the old drawings.
Hmm.
It's one of those things, I guess I think a lot of people are like this, where you have a hard time going back and looking at the older stuff you've done. I have that sort of relationship with the older stuff. But I was interested to see how many themes or how many things I could find that were introduced or brought up the first time around that are now coming back around again, 8 years later.
Hmm.
And it's remarkable how many are. Like I found from, it was like, must have been March of 2017, where it was, at the time, it was conjecture. It was these proposals. So there was, here's what we want to do. We want to take all the money away from PBS. And we want to, like, essentially reallocate to
Hmm.
defense. It was a proposal, and so I did a drawing about, like, how crazy would this be, and here we are. So all the stuff that had been proposed or floated out there, or something kind of like test the waters, all that stuff is just being put into action now, and there are no stopgaps. So the two forms
Hmm.
of checkmate on the president or the executive branch, I mean, they're both pretty neutered. We saw that today with the
Yeah.
Supreme Court. So what does that leave you with? And I think I would like to think that the same political apparatus that we've all been using is intact enough to allow for a normal legislative way out of this. I just don't see it happening. I just
Hmm.
don't. I don't. I mean, I'm someone who has, and I know this will sound tin hatish, but I'm someone who has a lot of questions around how someone like him could have a clean sweep of all seven swing states. I think the mathematical likelihood is
Yeah.
almost impossible. I'm not saying it didn't. It's something that hasn't been really looked at, along
I,
with a few other things. So, anyways,
I would
if
poo-poo that a lot more if he hadn't come out, like, right before the inauguration, saying, "Boy, that Elon Musk, he spent a lot of time with his computers in
or
Pennsylvania
telling it, or
helping me
before the
get this."
election,
Yeah,
don't bother voting. He told, I mean,
yeah,
like, 3 or 4
yeah.
times, he said, don't vote. We've got the votes. Like, so, anyways, my point being, you
Yeah.
know, the game has been rigged against the electorate for a long time in a broad way, more so put into full effect with Citizens United. Certainly didn't start there.
Yeah.
But now, to me, it's so bald faced. So my point is, I think things get better I don't see how things get better absent something like a general strike or
Hmm.
collective action. Like that's look at Europe. Look at France, right? When they tried
Sure.
to increase the retirement age by I think it was two
Hmm.
years, and they burned Paris to the ground.
Yeah.
I mean, there's I don't know how much more we're in that world that we've been in for forever, where we can
Yeah.
vote our way out of this. I just
Right.
I don't know. I don't know that that's realistic anymore. And it sounds wild to say, but I mean, just look around at the past, years, or but even less than that, really.
Hmm.
Um, so I think you that's probably what's going to take. I think it's only going to get so much worse.
Hmm.
The stuff that we know about is an infinitesimal fraction of the stuff that's happening. When you hear about all these ICE raids, that's
Yeah.
just the stuff that's seen and reported. I mean, how many people have been disappeared? How many women have been assaulted by people pretending to be ICE? They have
Hmm.
ICE costumes you can buy on Amazon. I mean, and this is
That's
this
not
is
surprising that it would be on
right
Amazon. Yeah.
for sure. I mean, there's been tons of documented cases of this, like of creep shows pretending to be ICE, and
Sure.
but that's just the stuff we know about. I
Hmm.
mean, so it's already so much worse than we're aware of, just in terms of a matter of degree.
Hmm.
And I there's not a lot to be encouraged by why that's going to slow
Hmm.
or abate in any way. Like I think it's going to get I think it's going to get way worse before it gets better, if it does.
Yeah. In terms of like collective action and such, how do you see the role not just of your art, but of regular other hobbyists doing other things who are trying to do whatever their thing is to make how do you see the regular person, what's their role in this situation? How do we make this better?
Well, uh,
We ride at
I
dawn.
don't,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't pretend to have all the answers,
Oh,
but I do,
sure.
I mean, I think
We'll take any and all
everybody,
ideas at this point.
I mean, everybody can play a role no matter what they're doing.
Hmm.
I think, one thing I think is crucial, just as a sort of a habit to begin forming, is really building upon the sense of community that you have. Like, so really,
Hmm.
working with the people that are either immediately around your literal neighbors or just within your community more broadly, familiarizing yourself with people. Those are the kinds of things, and sort of building groups that way, um, collaboratively. I mean, those are the kinds of things that are harder for the powers that be to counteract. Like, for example, the protests that happened, I think, were really great. It was great to see this sort of show of
Hmm.
solidarity and numbers. All that was great. Tactically, I would be much more interested to see, you know, 1,000 person protests than one really big one, because
Yeah.
those thousand people protests are way harder to contain and control.
Hmm.
And if they are still loosely organized, you can probably
Hmm.
enact a lot more change that you'd want to. Um, but I think people. I'm not going to tell people what to do or what their responsibility is, but it's looking out for one another. I think you know here, even not even here in Chicago. Of course, here in Chicago we have
Sure.
ICE on the streets. They're purposely going out these blue cities for a reason.
Hmm.
But people gotta lose this sense of complacency or fear. We can't have bystanders when this stuff is happening. We've seen time and
Hmm.
time again, when people insinuate themselves and get in the way and try to stop these things, they actually do.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
because in these moments, truly pressed, the action they're taking is illegal. There
Oh,
isn't a
yeah.
warrant, because, first of all, I forget the latest polling, which is constantly changing as they're getting more people, but it was something like 70 something percent, or maybe it was 80 something percent of the people that they had grabbed off the street had no criminal record.
Right.
So on its face, there's so much illegality that I think, if people were to get over that fear, the understandable fear of, like, paralyzed in the moment, what am I supposed to do in this moment? How can I intercede? Recognizing that the law, for what it's worth right now, is on our side to stop this from happening. It is definitionally kidnapping.
Yeah.
So it's about people, I think, understanding their place in the dynamic, and understanding that these are those times that you read about, where you're like, wow, what was
What would that
it
have been
like?
like?
How did people behave? Like, how did they, in the face of, what felt like all encompassing authoritarianism, like how did you navigate that? Well, we're finding out how we're doing it. So, for me, I don't know. I don't know how I fit into all of that. I think for me, with just making drawings, the only thing that I can feel good about or grateful for with that is, people. I think the best thing from this whole experience is when I get feedback from people who live they're like in some incredibly, super Trump heavy right wing place, and they feel totally alone. And people, will let me know that the drawings make me feel less alone, or the tone of it really mirrors how I feel about it. I think that's so. If the drawings I'm doing can make some of these people feel less alone,
Give them some validation, maybe.
even though they are politically,
Yeah.
it can embolden them to, like, persist and, continue to still speak their mind and advocate for the people and the causes that they need to. But I think I don't know, we're getting into odd territory here.
Yeah.
And it's going to be a challenge, I think, to every single person to see how they operate with each passing crazy thing that comes down. I don't know.
Well, Jesse, thank you so much for rallying the troops and giving some people some hope and something to laugh into the darkness about every once in a while.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Of course. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
A big thank you to Jesse for joining me, as well as to you for listening. I hope you got as much of a boost from Jesse as I did. It might seem trite, but just by doing your thing, whether it's art, music, writing, or even podcasting, we each help prop each other up. They want you to give up. So by doing any creative endeavor and spreading whatever joy and positivity you can is far from superfluous. Just keep going. Unless you're Joe Rogan. Please, just stop already. Thank you very much. Take care, and until next time.